Imagine a world of peace. Imagine it. Picture a land in which people don't harm other people. There'd be no murders, no assaults. There also wouldn't be anything destructive. It's a bit like imagining the vegetarian lions that Isaiah, the prophet, talks about. And if you don't believe me, look it up. It's in chapter 11, verse 7, vegetarian lions. I'm not kidding. That's beyond our ability to comprehend. Nothing tears anything else down in this picture of peace. Obviously, there's been a lot of violence in the news. I referenced it both in our opening word and just now and a moment ago. There was another, I hate saying this, another school shooting, this time in Evergreen, Colorado, this past week. And at almost the same time, a conservative commentator named Charlie Kirk was assassinated. And just 2 weeks ago, there was the gunman who injured 14 children and killed 2 at Annunciation Catholic School in Minneapolis. There's just so much. The endless onslaught is almost too much to bear and too much to proclaim. And I wish that I could preach about how to stop this. I wish I could say something to end the violence, yet we don't seem terribly interested in it. As a people, we, the people, don't seem terribly interested in ending the violence. Instead of finding ways to stop it, we find creative ways to enact it anew. Politicians vilify one another. People use their creativity to tear one another down and malign those with whom they disagree. Into this morass, we have this gospel lesson, the parable of the sower, telling a story with an absolute absurd exaggeration. I've shared about this passage before, and I've often talked about Jesus as telling a joke, which it probably would have been somewhat of a joke, but it was really just a ridiculous exaggeration. And it's fairly obvious, but someone was planting seeds. Some fell on the path, and birds ate them. They were trampled. Some fell on rocky soil. They didn't get good roots, and the sun came out, scorched them and dried them up. And some fell among thorns. They were choked out by the weeds and vines. But some fell on the good soil, and this is where his ridiculous exaggeration comes in. And they produced 100-fold. And there must have been a reaction, because our gospel authors record him sort of backing it down a little bit. Some 60, some 30. But wait till you hear what the actual crop yields were in first century Palestine. The absurdity is that they could have ever even imagined producing 100-fold. Israel is mostly rocky, so the seed, the first part of it, spreading seeds among the rocks, everyone would have resonated with that. There are some places where they've cleared the rocks, but those often have brambles. There are some valleys and plateaus with some arable land, but it's not great. And even there, most of it's pretty arid. And so those farmers are working with often less than a few inches of rainfall a year. In Jesus' time, that crop yield was often no more than 5 bushels per acre. In the U.S. today, as a contrast, winter wheat yields between 40 and 50 bushels per acre. And this is the audience. They were thinking of 5 as being a good harvest, where Jesus said, some are going to produce 100-fold. Everyone who heard it probably thought, that's crazy. What are you talking about, Jesus? It's almost like saying, imagine a world of peace. Imagine a world of peace. I think we all want to. There's a desire to imagine that. But just like his first listeners, that world of peace might sound impossible. When I was looking at wheat yields to better understand this parable, I learned that people didn't actually even reach 100-fold return until the 1980s. For Jesus, though, this was about more than agriculture. He wasn't talking about farming. He was talking about what is possible with God. He wanted his listeners, and he wanted us, in turn, to see how easily we sell ourselves short by focusing on what we think is possible. Instead of trusting God, instead of recognizing that with God all things are possible, we think about, well, can we do this? Can we accomplish this? When we planned this series on God and creation, today was specifically going to be about taking care of God's world by caring for coral reefs. They're in terrible danger, and I was inspired for this passage when I was on my sabbatical and I was scuba diving in Bonaire. And I saw what I can only describe as what looked like a PVC pipe Christmas tree underwater next to a reef. It looked like this. From the ocean floor, it was maybe 50 or 60 feet deep there. There were these PVC pipes going up, and then where the arms would come out from the tree, there were strings hanging down with little bits of coral on them. And when I swam through and was looking carefully at it, I saw a label that said Reef Renewal Bonaire. So that evening in our little apartment, I looked up Reef Renewal Bonaire and saw that they were using a technique called coral fragmentation to stimulate coral growth. It makes the coral grow faster. And over time, this can reverse some of the loss of habitat, some of the loss of coral. However, I realized that the violence that's dominating the headlines is part of a bigger picture. This week, as I looked at everything happening, I realized that this is a part of violence around the world. The repeated school shootings bring a tragic loss of life, and we all struggle to find words to respond with. This violence is an intensified version of the larger scale of violence that we as humanity experience when we tear God's world apart. In other words, the plastic in the ocean, the warming seas that yield much more powerful storms, all of these things don't quite slap us in the face the same way that a shooting does. But we're going to have to deal with these things. They're not going away. They are a part of this bigger picture of imagining peace and recognizing God's call for peace and unity. So when Jesus talks about impossible agricultural yields, we need to listen to the radical possibilities. And that's what Paul meant in our epistle lesson by the foolishness of Christ and the foolishness of the cross. In our reading from 1 Corinthians, Paul said, in the wisdom of God, the world missed the point. In the wisdom of God, the world didn't see what God was doing. Sometimes our days can be filled with a hard path, rocky soil, vines and weeds that choke everything out. They can take all kinds of forms. We might try to live out our calling. We might try to go back to those micro acts of peacemaking. And then life swoops in. Apathy, hate speech, unkindness, polarization, politicization, all of these things come together. Apathy can steal our seeds of hope. Hate speech takes our seeds of unity. People squabbling and fighting with one another can tear apart not only our country or the world, but even our family. Then weeds of thoughtlessness, baseless assumptions, or being taken for granted, or anything else can choke us until we struggle to figure out what it even means to be the salt and light anymore. Instead of seeing the hundredfold increase, endless bad news brings us down and can cloud our vision of God's possibilities. We forget faith. We lose sight of living this entire gospel message, this entire message that touches all parts of our lives, whether it's taking care of God's creation or trying to be peacemakers in a world that so desperately needs it. Jesus calls us to see the possibilities. But we get wrapped up in all these things that take us away. We get wrapped up in the bad news on a national level and interpersonal squabbles on a local level. God's got this big thing for us, and yet sometimes we refuse to see it. When I pictured the parable of the sower alongside the work of Reef Renewal Bon Air, I tried to think of something impossible. What's the hundredfold? What's the hundredfold increase in that situation? And as I was sitting there and then maybe later on another dive looking at the reef, I thought it would be growing another Great Barrier Reef. The Great Barrier Reef on the northeast coast of Australia. Some of our friends here have seen in person. I just heard about somebody who visited it recently. And it's 1,429 miles long. It's visible from space. It's sort of a cultural icon. We say the Great Barrier Reef and everybody sort of knows what we're talking about. This is the kind of dreaming outside the box. This is the kind of 100-fold increase that Jesus would tell us if he was telling the parable of the sower, but instead talking to a group from Reef Renewal Bon Air. It's like this. You plant the reef, and before you know it, it's massive, it's big, it's so big, it's bigger than the Great Barrier Reef. We go, Jesus, come on. Coral grows really slow. That's impossible. And there we go again, telling God what God can do when God's trying to tell us what is possible. There we go again, trying to tell God how to fit inside our box of understanding when God's trying to tell us, I've got a big thing I want to do, and I want to do it through you. In a world racked with violence, we can apply this same transforming vision to anything we face. I may not be able to preach us into stopping the shooting. I may not be able to say anything that will end the violence or make people try to take better care of God's world. But Jesus can. Jesus can change us. Jesus didn't focus on the difficulties of this. Jesus didn't say, well, what I'm talking about is if we have genetically modified. No, Jesus wasn't going into the lab. He was saying, hey, look, have faith. There's a thing I can do, and if you follow me, if you move with me, this is a thing that is possible. He didn't emphasize the ways we struggle with his message. He didn't tell us to think about the times we try to live faithfully while the good in our lives goes nowhere, or even has other people trying to zap it away from us. He gave us hope. A hope that transcends our expectations, a hope that transcends possibilities, and a hope that fits perfectly with this day on the liturgical calendar. This is the Feast of the Holy Cross, which is not something that is familiar to us as Baptists. It's commonly practiced in most Orthodox churches, Roman Catholic churches, some other traditions, and it goes back to September 13th in the year 355, when some people gathered together to dedicate the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem. The next day, they decided to venerate the cross who they call St. Helena had found. This was Constantine's mother, St. Helena. And for the Roman Catholics and the Orthodox, this is a feast to remember the true cross of Jesus and an invitation to reflect on what it means. So it's an invitation to think about the cross. For me, I look at it as an invitation to think about what is possible. See, the cross, oh, it's not there. Where did our cross go? It's on the banner? Okay, good. I was gesturing toward the cross, which is right. Nope. No, what does the cross mean? See, the cross is a reminder that God loved the world, so God came incarnate to be in the world. God came to walk among us and proclaim the kingdom. And here's what we did to respond. Some accepted. We're still here talking about it. but many more didn't. And so the cross is a reminder that in God's perfection, our response is the crucifixion. And we're complicit in the cross every single day, every single one of us, when we sin. We are complicit in the cross of Jesus Christ. But you see, God said that's not the end. And so on a day like this, the Feast of the Holy Cross, I don't reflect on the cross, I look at the possibilities. Because when humanity said to God, we're going to kill you, God said, I see your death, and I'm going to raise you one Easter. When we say death, God says life. When we say destruction, God says creation. When we say darkness, God says light. When we say war, violence, or anything else, God says peace. Wherever we see darkness and death and destruction and all those things that tear us apart, God sees light and possibility and presents us with that on a silver platter to say, here it is. It's for you. It's available for you to feast right now. So I return to where we started. I said, imagine a world of peace. Is peace possible? With Jesus, all things are possible. And Jesus calls us to be agents of peace, to be present in this world as the salt and light, to be a beacon of light in this community, drawing people together in love, harmony, and community. God can use you in that mission today. Amen.